So today we thought we'd talk about relationships at work because
Yeah.
that's obviously a biggie because
Mm.
we're rather thrown into an environment with people who could be anybody, any
Yes.
personality.
Mm.
Um, so just as a quick recap, the first couple of talks that we've shared, we're really talking about understanding our true nature and the fact that our feelings are always coming from our thoughts and from inside us. So it's inside out, which is really the number one thing that's quite helpful to people.
Mm.
And the other thing to just bear in mind is that our thoughts are always temporary. So I think that's really helpful as well because we can have a little bit of space between our thinking and then what we do with it. So just
Mm.
slowing down and allowing that to be is quite helpful. So when we see that, perhaps we can start to see that the cause of all problems really is insecure thinking. So just bear that in mind as we chat about relationships at work, because I think that's really helpful. And I was thinking about this beforehand, and I thought I'd share an example that I had at work in my own life, which was quite a long time ago now, when I didn't have my own business. I was working in corporate. Um, and I was promoted, which was brilliant, very exciting.
Mm.
But my colleague who I sat next to wasn't. And from memory, I think it was a surprise to both of us, to be honest, at the time, obviously to him, because it wasn't about him, but
Mm.
um, clearly that changed the landscape of us working together. And I'll say he wasn't very happy about it, to put it politely. And he did start to get quite confrontational with me. So,
Mm.
that was, it was tricky and it was unpleasant. And our relationship never really, got back to how it was. But I didn't know what I know now, but I
Mm.
could clearly see that I could see his perspective. I could see why he might be not so happy about it. And based on what I know now, you can see even more that he was just trying to protect his own identity. He was concerned about him and what it meant to him, and obviously had a lot of thinking around that. So I think that's a really good example. And the other thing I was going to mention is in my podcast, I talk about having an open heart, open mind, and being as curious as possible.
Mm.
And I just think when we allow that space to be more open and more curious and perhaps see the other person's perspective, we can just have a slightly more balanced and secure baseline of our being and be more truly free to just be. So that was what I was going to bring to the table today. So how about you, Lindsay? What would
Yeah.
you add to
I love
that?
that. Well, yeah, I just think it's really important to remember that, particularly I think at work, where we often believe that we have an opinion that is correct or right, or we have a way of doing things that is correct or right, or that there is an outcome that should or shouldn't happen within the business that we're working in, or if it's in our own business. And when our perspective looks really real and true, like it is the truth with a capital T, that's where we get into difficulty, I think, or one of the places we can get into difficulty with our relationships at work. Now, obviously, sometimes there are decisions that are made within a business that don't always have the best outcome. And possibly you could be in a situation where, had the company proceeded with your idea or your way of doing things, there may have been a better outcome. Now, we can't ever know that because we can't live in these two parallel universes. But just what's really important what I think is so helpful to see, because when it looks like our belief, our perspective, our way of thinking, our opinion about something is the absolute truth, it makes us quite stubborn. It means that sometimes we don't budge. Everybody else starts to look like the enemy and starts to look wrong. But when we can know that we're living in our reality of believing our thinking that's occurring to us and that's creating our feelings, and then our colleague A, B, C, and D over here are all living in their realities with their opinion and their thinking that's looking really real and true. And that's where conflict comes from, is where, as you said, where people aren't prepared to be open-hearted or open-minded to the possibility that what they are thinking and believing is the truth or the best way forward, or is indeed the truth about, even if there's like a disagreement or a conflict, um, in terms of like who said what and who's right and who's wrong, all of that is all so subjective. Absolutely nothing that is objective. But at work, where our kind of that, as we talked about in the first live, where that survival security button can get really heavily pressed, it can look even more important than maybe our relationships at home. So, for example, like when you have a disagreement with one of your children or a teenager, sometimes you can just walk away and say, okay, we're just going to have a different point of view here. But sometimes at work, because it looks like way more important sometimes about disagreements at work, it feels like, no, I can't walk away from this. I can't have a different opinion, or they can't disagree with me. We get really caught in our own head and in loads of overthinking about. But it's just really good to know that survival security button is being pushed. It's going to make us believe our thinking even more. But what if we can, as you have mentioned, what if we can just step back, take a moment to reflect, or just, leave it overnight, or, I mean, I think when you're in this, if you're in a kind of like conflict or differing opinions, or, kind of in this kind of tricky situation at work, or even if you've actually had an argument with someone or a disagreement with someone, I mean, I think you'll know from like in your own experience, how, say you argue with your spouse or your child, and you can be in the blaze of the argument and the disagreement, and then 3 days later, it can look completely different. And the same is true at work, and giving it that space at work can be so helpful, because our thinking settles down, our wisdom can speak to us a little bit more, that overthinking can stop. And then sometimes we can shift into that more kind of open space, as you said, of being able to maybe see someone else's perspective, or even just to see that our perspective isn't the truth, is so helpful.
Yeah, I think that's all we're ever really encouraging people to see is just, feel how you feel. And if you don't feel great, slow down and stop if you can. Say
Mm,
less.
mm,
Give yourself that space to allow the thoughts to settle. And as we said at the beginning, your thoughts are temporary and they will change anyway. That's why having this sense of how you feel, feeling that your thinking is bubbling away and not making you feel good, and just slowing down, giving it space is amazing. And even if you are in a meeting and a resolution has to be made,
mm,
we can do that in the moment. I mean, I just put my hand on my heart and just breathe a little bit. And there's all sorts of things like the physiological side that you can do where you breathe in twice through the nose and then once out through the mouth. And that settles our nervous system down and takes us out of that fight or flight. But it's really just having that awareness that we're feeling our thinking.
mm,
And if we don't feel good, we know where that's coming from. Always, whatever the
mm,
situation is, whoever
mm,
you're with, whatever's going on.
mm,
So it's really very simple. And as I said at the beginning, it's like understanding our true nature and understanding where feelings and thoughts are guiding us, really.
mm. So if someone was listening and said, I don't know what my true nature is,
Mm.
how would you put that into, because I think everyone's got their own kind of,
Yeah.
what they mean by that, but maybe what do you mean by
Yeah.
that?
That's a really good point. I mean, as I said, to me, it's about having an open heart and open mind and just being curious.
Mm,
The curiosity, I think, is the number one greatest quality we can have,
mm,
because it just allows that little bit of gap between those, as you said, opinions and shoulds that
mm,
we have, and just gives us space to think, is that really true? So
mm,
that's what I'd say. And when we are more curious and slow down a little bit, even if our thinking's going mad, we can't always make
mm.
our brain be quiet.
No.
If we understand what's happening, we know our true nature is slow down and come back to this calm, quieter space. irrespective of what's going on here, the chatterer.
Mm.
And as I said, I think then we're just a little bit more balanced and secure in our true nature, which
Mm.
is before all the thoughts and all the habitual thinking and all the narration that goes on up here.
Mm.
I mean, I just think we are so much more than our thinking
Yeah.
and our mind.
Yeah.
And yet we've kind of got it a bit backwards at the moment. We've become very thinking and mind and
Yeah.
intellectual heavy. And actually, there's so much more available than that. We're more than that.
Mm.
And that comes from that slight curiosity and slowing down and just
Mm.
a little question mark, really. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. How
Yeah.
about you? How would you describe it?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it's kind of just, it's, it's that capacity for awareness. It's that, which isn't like, it's not, that isn't the most brilliant word, because that's a slightly kind of loaded
Yeah.
word as well. I
Yeah.
mean, almost all of these words
Yeah.
are a bit loaded.
Yeah.
But really, what for me is, it's that capacity, it's that part of all of us that is able to notice our thinking.
Mhm.
That's the bit of us that is actually the bit that's connected to something beyond our intellect and is connected to that kind of knowing space. You know how maybe when I mean, sometimes I like to give a couple of it, if you've ever walked into a property to buy it or rent it, and you just kind of know somewhere, oh, I could live here, or God, I couldn't live here. And then you kind of think about all the pros and cons. It's that space of just that sort of knowing that I think we have become disconnected from, and particularly I think disconnected from at work, because work is obviously a place where, or in most roles, not all roles, where our intellect is incredibly prized, and nothing wrong with the intellect. It's a massively helpful tool. But we've also got that capacity to fall back into that knowing space, that awareness that is, as you say, is a slower, more settled space than the busyness of the mind. That's actually incredibly helpful to be in tune with that at work, and particularly in tune with that at work in our relationships.
Yeah.
Because every human being has that capacity, and we all have the capacity to get lost in our overthinking, to get lost in believing that our opinions are right, and to get lost in the belief that other people are making us feel a certain way. We all have the capacity for that, but we've also all got this capacity. You know how a solution comes to you for
Yeah.
something with a project, or
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's that's another massive, huge part of our experience that I think um we pay as much attention
We've
to.
lost trust of it, haven't we? We've lost.
Even awareness of it
Yeah.
sometimes. I think everyone knows it when they hear it,
Yes.
but aren't necessarily consciously connected to it.
Yeah. And I think the metaphor of, our mind and thoughts being like a raging sea on the top of the seabed, and then the true nature or awareness being the very bottom of the seabed where it's completely still and quiet and calm. Apparently, I've not been down there myself.
Yeah.
Yes.
You've seen
Yeah.
footage of
Yes. Yeah.
David Attenborough.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's really handy for people to kind of have, then if you're more visual, to have that kind of visual in mind. And there's lots of other metaphors as well. But yeah, I think that's quite helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what we were talking about, I think, with the relationships, where we can get really caught up in the choppiness of the water of, they made me feel like this, they shouldn't have treated me that way. I'm right, they're wrong, or they're right, I'm not, whichever way it goes. But actually there is, when we can notice that all of that choppiness is happening, but there's also this deeper, stiller place from which that we can tune into for solutions, or for, conflict resolution, or for just finding the middle path, or making a what's the word? It's gone out of my head. Compromise, or for making a compromise. That capacity is absolutely always with us as well, because that's our true nature or awareness, or whatever we want to call that.
Yeah, and I think it's quite interesting because at work and maybe even at school, how often are we allowed that kind of time to drop in or slow down? Everything is very fast paced.
Yeah.
Even, I notice with my boys on their phone all the time, they think they need to reply to messages, urgently, immediately. And that's just friends. And they've kind of grown up with that mentality. So we're kind of talking about the opposite
mm,
of lots of things. So we're kind of talking from the inside out.
mm.
And we're also saying slow down rather than speed up,
Yeah.
drop the thoughts, let go rather
Mm,
than think about it more.
yeah. And I think particularly if we're in conflict with someone at work or we have an ongoing kind of grumbling disagreement
Mhm.
with them,
Yeah.
the feelings, because the mind is so sped up and busy about it, and then we get the corresponding feeling in the
Mhm.
body. And
Yeah.
those feelings can look like they're quite urgent and that they need, and that the urgency is pointing us to,
Mhm.
I need to find a solution
Yes.
to this. And
Yeah.
also because most people, not all people, most people are really uncomfortable with the perception that someone doesn't like them or that they've
Yeah.
offended someone or that people are talking, all of that kind of, ego stuff that goes on for all of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
But, so that feeling, all of that discomfort can make us feel like it's really important that I solve this, that I fix it, that I apologize or that I sort this out with them, it can get really urgent. And what
Yeah.
you're pointing us to is no, that feeling of all of that urgency is reflecting our thinking.
Yeah.
It's not reflecting the truth of the situation, which is not that it has to be sorted out yesterday. It's not actually, you can take some time here, give yourself that space to allow a different perspective to come in. And invariably, I know in arguments I've had in my own life, that time it just softens
Yeah.
things. And then eventually you come to some resolution without really having to think about it.
Yeah. And life will move on.
Mhm.
Something will happen anyway,
Mm,
whether we do anything or not. And that is so freeing.
mm,
It doesn't
yeah.
mean we don't do anything, but it just means we can take everything more lightly and
Mm,
just, again, trust. That word comes up for me a lot. Trust.
mm.
Something's going to happen,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the feeling of tension and, urgency is just an alarm, as we've said
Mm,
before, and we will probably
mm.
keep saying
Yeah.
forever now. And it's such a helpful, friendly alarm. So
Mm,
hopefully
yeah.
people take anything away from it, it can be that again. So
Yeah, exactly. It's waking us up, isn't it? That we're up in our heads, believing the story that our mind is telling us about this, my relationship with my boss, my coworker, when actually it's not telling you the truth of that. It's just telling you that you're lost in your own mind,
yeah,
about the relationship, not actually about the content or the quality of the relationship.
yeah. Again, it's our thoughts about
Mm,
A, B,
yeah.
C, X, Y, Z, whatever that is causing the feeling in us inside. So
Mm,
yeah, that's really helpful.
mm,
Brilliant.
yeah.
Well, it's nearly 20 minutes again. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining me again. And
No, pleasure. It's been
we will
great
try
to
and do
be
it
here.
again next week.
We will.
Okay.
All right. Take care. Bye,
Bye.
Susie.
Bye.